Welcome to my fireside. My name's Nannie Annie, and I'm going to share with you another tale of ghostly goings-on at this end of St Andrews. Now I'm casting my mind back to one winter's afternoon when I've invited some friends round for their tea, and we were all sitting round the fireside having a blether, when one of the company, a chap that I didn't really ken, but he was a friend of a friend, and he'd come along, and there was a kind of a pause in the conversation, and this man piped up. You ken, it's really curious when you find that you've got a screaming skull following you about all over the place. Well, we looked at him. What do you mean? Did he be daft? Things like that didn't happen. We didn't ken anybody that has a screaming skull following them about. They'd be daft. But he said, well, it's true. This is what happened to me. I've got this skull that follows me about and pops up every now and again in the most unexpected places, no matter where I am. Well, we told him he was really, really stupid, and if he started thinking things like that, he would go dotty. But he insisted, and he told us to ask all his friends round the coast, that they would vouch for him. Well, we didn't ken any of his friends to ask him. But we insisted that he tell us the story. And this is the story he tell. It seems that many years ago, this man had an ancestor who stayed here in St Andrews by the name of Neville Beecham. Now this man was a bit of a rogue, a ne'er-do-weel. His favourite pastimes were gambling and womanising, and they say he could drink anybody under the table, even in they days when hard drinking was quite common. Anyway, this laddie married a bonny lassie for Perth. She was the daughter of a silk merchant, but he didn't treat her very well at all. And they say she died a couple of years later of a broken heart. Well, this Neville Beecham, they called him Flash Neville, you ken, that was his nickname. He was remorseful, grief-stricken that he'd done something terrible to his wife. And he disappeared for a while, only to come back to St Andrews and enter the monastery of Greyfriars, as a monk. Well, they say it was because he was grief-stricken and remorseful, but other folks said that it was because he was in hiding, because the lassie's family were after him. Her older brother, a wild sea dog, was bent on revenge and swore to hunt down this Flash Neville and kill him. Well, it was quite a long time till he discovered that Neville was a monk in Greyfriars Monastery. But he did, eventually. And one afternoon, just before prayers, he forced his way into the chapel at the monastery and took a Scots sword and sliced off the monk's head as he stood in the kirk aisle. That's when something strange happened. The body of the monk fell to the ground, but his severed head shot up into the air, screeching and screaming, and then disappeared out of the roof. Well, they gave the monk's body a decent burial, but they never ever managed to get a hold of that severed head. In fact, for many years afterwards, it would be seen swirling and barreling round in the air above the monastery, much to the terror of the monks and other townsfolk who found themselves out after dark in that vicinity. Well, many years later, the head had turned into a skull by this time. And this chap that was there said that he'd come to live in St Andrews. And one night, he was sitting by his own fireside when he was overcome by a terrible urge, a terrible compulsion to go out. Now, it wasn't a very nice night, it was pouring with rain, and it was cold. But out he went, and he wandered about the streets of St Andrews for quite an hour or two, until eventually he found himself at the bottom of Greyfriars Gardens. And he found himself in front of a big building that he hadn't actually noticed before. And there was a gate there. And he went in the gate and he found himself in a chapel. Well, he hid behind one of the pews. And there, as he watched, he saw the whole story unfold before him. Into the chapel came this rough-looking fella with a sword in his hand. And as he watched, this man strode up to a monk and sliced off his head. And as he watched, the monk's body dropped to the floor and the head, screaming, floated up to the ceiling and disappeared through the roof with a terrible noise. Well, a few minutes later he found himself back outside again, sitting on a low wall. He was drookit. And so he didn't really ken what had happened, but he got up and he started to walk home, but he noticed lying at his feet was what he thought was a football. Well, he gave it a wee kick, and much to his horror, he realised that it wasn't a football, because this was the skull. It turned over on its side and it gnashed its teeth at him, and it screeched and flew off up into the air once more. Well, he took his cell off him and dried himself out, and he didn't ken what to make of it. And a few days later, he discovered that an old uncle that he didn't really ken had died somewhere abroad. And he was told that this uncle had been sorely bothered by that skull. It followed him around all over the world, popping up when it was least expected. And well, he says, I think it's going to be my turn now. I think I'm the last of this family. And he was right. I'm telling you, I'm right. It follows me about. No matter where I go to stay, it turns up. At the moment, I've managed to get rid of it, and I'm keeping it locked up in a box, up in an attic room. And it's quiet most of the time. But every now and again, you hear drifting down the screaming and the moaning. But I'll tell you something else. It disappears every now and again. I can go and look and it'll no be there. And they say that at these times, it's back along the road, swirling around, above where the monastery used to be, visiting the place where its owner had perished. Now, if you're down by Greyfriars Gardens on a dark night and you start to hear strange noises, leave as quick as you can.